There is a person you haven't met yet, but you spend every single day influencing their life. They don't have a voice in your current decisions. They don't have a vote in how you spend your Tuesday nights, and they can't reach back through the fabric of time to grab you by the shoulders and tell you to wake up. That person is your future self. We spend so much of our lives looking backward, nursing the wounds of the past, or obsessing over the apologies we feel we are owed by people who hurt us. But we rarely stop to consider the apology that is brewing within our own skin. We are currently in the process of betraying the one person who has to live with the consequences of our current laziness, our current fears, and our current indecision. If you were to meet yourself 10 years from now, would that person look at you with gratitude? Or would they look at you with tears in their eyes because of the potential you traded for comfort? The apology you owe to your future self is not just a polite gesture. It is a recognition of the theft you are committing right now. Every time you choose the path of least resistance, you are stealing from the person you are meant to become. You are stealing their confidence, their financial security, their health, and their peace of mind. We act as if the future is some far-off land that will take care of itself, but the future is nothing more than the compounding interest of your present moments. We live in a culture that worships the now, but it does so in a way that is destructive. We are told to treat ourselves, but we often treat ourselves at the expense of our future. We choose the temporary hit of dopamine over the long-term satisfaction of a job well done. We choose the comfort of the couch over the discipline of the gym. We choose the safety of silence over the risk of speaking our truth. And in each of these moments, we are accumulating a debt. It is a debt of regret, and it is the most expensive debt you will ever owe. Think about the version of you that is waiting at the finish line of your life. That person is either going to be resting in the satisfaction of a life well lived, or they are going to be gasping for air, wondering why you didn't give them a better foundation to stand on. You owe it to that person to be exhausted today, so they can be rested tomorrow. You owe it to that person to be brave today so they can be secure tomorrow. The apology starts when you realize that you have been treating your future self like a stranger rather than your most important responsibility. You have been treating your potential like a hobby rather than a mandate. The weight of this apology is heavy because it requires you to admit that you have been your own worst enemy. It's easy to blame the economy, your upbringing, or your boss for where you are. But the future you doesn't care about excuses. The future you only cares about results. When you sit in the silence of your own mind at night, you can feel that gap. The distance between who you are and who you know you should be. That gap is where the apology lives. It is the sound of a life that is being silenced by maybe tomorrow. We have become experts at negotiating with our greatness. We tell ourselves that we will start when the timing is right, or when we have more money, or when we feel more confident. But confidence is a result, not a prerequisite. By waiting to feel ready, you are sentencing your future self to a life of what-ifs. Imagine standing in a room with every version of yourself that could have existed if you had just followed through. Imagine the version of you that started that business, the version that stayed in shape, the version that mastered that skill. Now, look at the version that actually exists. If there is a massive discrepancy, you owe an apology. But an apology without change is just manipulation. You cannot just say you're sorry to your future. You have to prove it by changing your behavior in the present. We often think of self-care as bubble baths and relaxation, but real self-care is doing the hard things now so that your life is easier later. Real self-care is discipline. It is saying no to the things that don't serve your ultimate vision. It is the willingness to be misunderstood by people who are content with being average. Your future self is begging you to stop caring about the opinions of people who won't even be in your life in 5 years. They are begging you to stop sacrificing your destiny on the altar of social approval. The apology you owe is for every time you dimmed your light because you were afraid of making others feel uncomfortable. It's for every time you stayed in a toxic situation because you were afraid of being alone. It's for every time you settled for good enough when you knew you were capable of extraordinary. This is the moment where the apology begins to transform into action. You have to realize that you are the architect of a building you will eventually have to live in. If you build it with cheap materials and a shaky foundation, you can't complain when the roof leaks 20 years from now. You are laying the bricks today. Are they straight? Are they solid? Or are you just hoping that somehow, miraculously, the building will stand on its own? Most people spend their lives running away from the person they could be, because that person is intimidating. The ideal you is a demanding figure. That version of you requires early mornings, late nights, and a level of focus that most people find repulsive. But that version of you is also the one who is free. The apology you owe to your future self is for the freedom you are currently throwing away. Every time you succumb to a vice, every time you let a fear dictate your movement, you are putting handcuffs on your future. You are narrowing the options available to the older version of you. You are deciding right now whether that person gets to travel the world or whether they are stuck in a cubicle paying off debts for things they didn't even need. You are deciding whether they are surrounded by love and vitality or whether they are lonely and bitter. The power you hold in this moment is terrifying, and that is why you have been avoiding it. It is easier to live in a state of perpetual apology than it is to take the throne of your own life. But the clock is ticking, and the future is arriving. To continue this journey, we move from the realization of our neglect to the brutal confrontation of our habits. This is the part where we stop looking at the horizon and start looking at the dirt under our fingernails. The second part of the apology you owe to your future self centers on the wasted currency of time. We treat time as if it is an infinite resource, a bottomless well from which we can always draw another bucket. But your future self knows the truth. Time is a predator that eventually catches everyone. You owe an apology for every hour you spent scrolling through the lives of strangers while your own life sat gathering dust. You owe an apology for the someday that never appeared on any calendar. We act as if we are immortal, procrastinating on our passions, as if we have 1,000 years to get around to them. Your future self is looking back at your youth, your energy, and your health, screaming at you to use them while they are still in your possession. They are watching you trade your most valuable asset for pennies, for distractions that don't even make you happy, for entertainment that you won't even remember by tomorrow morning. We must apologize for the lack of urgency. We have been lulled into a sleepwalk by the comfort of our modern world, forgetting that greatness is a result of friction. You owe an apology to the version of you that wanted to be a leader, but instead chose to be a follower because it was quieter. Think about the physical body you inhabit. This is the only vessel your future self gets to travel in. Are you maintaining it, or are you sabotaging it? You owe an apology for the poison you've put into your system, not out of necessity, but out of boredom or emotional weakness. You owe an apology for the sedentary days where you let your muscles atrophy and your heart grow sluggish. Your future self wants to be able to play with their grandchildren. They want to be able to hike mountains. They want to be able to wake up without a litany of preventable aches and pains. When you neglect your health today, you are essentially signing a warrant for the suffering of your future self. You are deciding that a moment of indulgence now is worth a month of hospital visits later. That is a lopsided trade, and it is a betrayal of the highest order. We often say we don't have time to exercise or cook healthy meals, yet we have time for everything else that matters less. The apology here is an admission of misplaced priorities. It is admitting that you valued the taste of the sugar more than the strength of your own bones. Then there is the apology for the mental clutter. Whoa! We allow our minds to become dumping grounds for negativity, gossip, and useless information. You owe your future self an apology for every limiting belief you allowed to take root in your subconscious. You've told yourself you're not the type to be successful, or that you're bad with money, or that you're just not a lucky person. These aren't facts. They are curses you have placed upon your own path. Your future self has to work twice as hard to break the chains of the identity you are forging right now. If you spend your days telling yourself you are a failure, you are building a prison that your future self will have to live in. You owe an apology for the books you didn't read, the mentors you didn't seek out, and the difficult conversations you avoided because your ego was too fragile to handle the feedback. We protect our pride at the expense of our progress. We would rather stay right in our current mediocrity than be wrong on our way to mastery. This intellectual stagnation is a debt that your future self will pay in the form of missed opportunities and a lack of specialized knowledge when the big doors finally start to open. Consider the financial apology. This is often the most painful one to confront. We live in a world designed to keep us in debt, to keep us trading our hours for objects that lose value the moment we buy them. You owe an apology for the money you spent trying to impress people you don't even like. You owe an apology for the lack of discipline that kept you from building a safety net. Your future self wants the freedom to say no to a toxic job, the freedom to retire with dignity, the freedom to be generous to others. But because you wanted the latest gadget or the flashy car today, you've tied their hands. You forced them to keep grinding long after their spirit is tired. You've traded their peace of mind for a temporary status symbol. The apology here is about recognizing that every dollar you mismanage today is a brick removed from the fortress of your future security. We must stop pretending that we will figure it out later. Later is a myth. Later is just a collection of nows that you haven't arrived at yet. If you aren't figuring it out now, you aren't figuring it out. Furthermore, we owe an apology for our lack of emotional resilience. We crumble under the slightest pressure. We let a single negative comment ruin our entire week. We let a rejection stop us from ever trying again. Your future self needs you to be tougher. They need you to develop a skin that is thick enough to withstand the storms of life. Every time you quit because things got hard, you left your future self with the leftovers of a life. You left them with the what could have been. You owe an apology for your lack of persistence. Success is rarely a matter of genius. It is usually a matter of who can stay in the ring the longest. By throwing in the towel early, you are telling your future self that they aren't worth the fight. You are saying that your temporary discomfort is more important than their permanent legacy. We must apologize for our fragility. We have been pampered by a world that seeks to remove all obstacles, forgetting that it is the obstacles that create the strength. Your future self doesn't want an easy life. They want a capable version of you who can handle a difficult one. This part of the apology is about the standard you set for yourself. You owe an apology for the low bar you've established. You have been playing a small game in a massive universe. You have been staying in the shallow end of the pool because you were afraid of the depth, forgetting that all the treasure is at the bottom. Your future self is capable of so much more than you are currently asking of them. You are like a person with a Ferrari who never shifts out of first gear. You are idling in the driveway of life, complaining about the view. The apology is for the lack of ambition, not for the sake of greed, but for the sake of growth. You were given a unique set of talents, a unique perspective, and a unique spark, and you have been treating it like a burden rather than a gift. You owe an apology for the good enough attitude that has become your default setting, 1 second at a time. The apology is due, and the only currency accepted is your effort. The final stage of this apology is the most difficult because it requires the death of your excuses. It is the transition from the why to the how, and the recognition that the time for mourning your lost potential has officially expired. You owe an apology to your future self for the sheer amount of energy you have wasted on self-pity. We spend years sitting in the ashes of our mistakes, replaying the tapes of our failures, and using our trauma as a reason to stay stagnant. But your future self doesn't need your explanations. They need your evolution. They are waiting for the version of you that decides that being a victim is no longer an option. You owe an apology for every time you use your past as a leash to keep yourself from running toward your future. The version of you 10 years from now doesn't care who broke your heart or who didn't believe in you. They only care if you had the courage to heal so that they wouldn't have to carry your bleeding wounds into their old age. We must address the apology of missed connections and neglected relationships. You owe an apology to your future self for the bridges you burned out of ego and the walls you built out of fear. We often push away the people who challenge us because it's easier to surround ourselves with those who validate our mediocrity. Your future self wants to be surrounded by a tribe of giants, by people who push them to be better, by a family that feels secure. But you are currently making choices that lead to isolation. You owe an apology for the "I'm too busy" texts, the missed birthdays, and the lack of presence when you were physically in the room but mentally miles away. You are robbing your future self of a support system. You are making them walk a hard road alone because you were too guarded to be vulnerable today. Relationships are the only thing that will truly matter when the lights start to dim. Yet we treat them as secondary to our distractions. There is also the apology for the lack of self-respect. You owe your future self an apology for every time you stayed in a room where you weren't valued. Every time you accepted crumbs when you deserved the whole meal. You taught the world how to treat you. Your future self now has to work twice as hard to demand the respect that you should have established years ago. You've allowed people to walk over your boundaries because you were afraid of conflict, leaving your future self with a reputation for being a doormat. You owe an apology for the lack of no in your vocabulary. By saying yes to everything that doesn't matter, you have been saying no to the one thing that does, your destiny. Your future self is begging you to develop a backbone today so they can stand tall tomorrow. They are begging you to stop seeking external validation and start building internal worth. The most profound apology, however, is for the lack of faith. Not necessarily a religious faith, but a faith in the possibility of your own transformation. You owe an apology for the cynicism you've adopted as a defense mechanism. It's cool to be cynical in this world. It's easy to be the person who says it won't work or why bother. But cynicism is just a coward's way of avoiding disappointment. By being cynical, you have been protecting yourself from the pain of trying, but you have also been insulating your future self from the joy of succeeding. You owe an apology for the lack of wonder, for the lack of curiosity, and for the way you've allowed the world to make you cold. Your future self wants to live in a world of color, but you are painting it in shades of gray because you're afraid of the brightness. You owe an apology for giving up on your dreams before you even gave them a fair chance to breathe. Now, we must turn this apology into a covenant. An apology is just words if it isn't followed by a radical shift in direction. To truly apologize to your future self, you must become a person who is obsessed with their well-being. You must start making decisions as if you are a guardian for that future person. When you look at the food you're about to eat, ask, is this a gift from my future self or a burden? When you look at the work you're avoiding, ask, will my future self thank me for this rest or curse me for this delay? When you're about to lose your temper or give up on a project, ask, is this the story I want my future self to tell? This shift in perspective is the only way to pay back the debt. You must become the person you were always supposed to be, not because it's easy, but because the alternative is a level of regret that no human soul was meant to carry. Imagine, for a moment, that you are on your deathbed. The room is quiet, and the air is thin. In those final moments, the you of today comes to visit. If you haven't changed, that encounter will be filled with silence and the heavy weight of things left unsaid. But if you start today, if you offer this apology through action, that final meeting will be one of triumph. Your future self will take your hand and say, thank you. Thank you for the mornings you didn't want to get up, but did. Thank you for the money you didn't spend, so I could be free. Thank you for the risks you took when you were terrified. Thank you for not giving up on me. That is the only goal that matters. Every other metric of success, the likes, the status, the temporary pleasures, will fade into nothingness. The only thing that remains is the relationship between who you are and who you became. Stop waiting for a sign. Stop waiting for the pain to go away before you start moving. The pain is the fuel. Use the guilt of your past mistakes not as a weight to sink you, but as a fire to propel you. You owe it to the person you are going to be to stop being the person you used to be. The apology ends here, and the work begins. Your future self is watching. They are rooting for you. They are rooting for you. They are hoping that today is the day you finally decide that they are worth the effort. Do not let them down again. You have the power to rewrite the ending of your story, but the pen is in your hand right now, and the page is turning. Write something that makes the future you proud to have known you. Write something that justifies the struggle. Write a life that requires no more apologies. This is your moment. This is your turning point. Rise up and become the hero that your future self is waiting for. The debt is high, but your potential is higher. Start paying it back, one disciplined choice at a time, until the apology is no longer necessary, and all that is left is the glorious, undeniable reality of your success.